Very few books in history carry the weight that crime and punishment carries. This is not simply a novel about a murder. This is a novel about what happens after the murder, inside the mind, inside the soul, inside the suffocating corridors of guilt that no human being can escape. When Fyodor Dostoevsky put his pen to paper in 1865, he was not writing from comfort. He was writing from the wreckage of his own life. He had stood before a firing squad. He had felt the blindfold tighten around his eyes. He had heard the order being given. And then, at the last possible second, the order was reversed. A mock execution. A cruel, calculated psychological torture ordered by Tsar Nicholas I. Dostoevsky survived. But the man who walked away from that moment was not the same man who had walked toward it. He spent 4 years in a Siberian labor camp. He worked in chains. He slept on frozen ground. He watched men break, mentally, spiritually, completely. And when he finally returned to society, he carried something with him that no other writer of his era possessed: a first-hand, bone-deep understanding of what it means to be crushed, humiliated, and yet somehow still alive. That understanding became Crime and Punishment. The year is 1865. Russia is in a state of violent intellectual turbulence. The old world, the world of the Tsar, the Orthodox Church, the rigid social hierarchy, is cracking under the pressure of new ideas flooding in from Western Europe. Nihilism, utilitarianism, the radical belief that morality itself is a construction, a cage built by the powerful to control the weak. Young men across Russia were devouring these philosophies like starving wolves. And one of those young men was Rodion Romanovich Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov is 23 years old. He is brilliant, dangerously, obsessively brilliant. He is a former law student in St. Petersburg, but he has abandoned his studies. He lives alone in a tiny, suffocating garret, a room so small, so low-ceilinged, so oppressive that it seems less like a room and more like a coffin. He barely eats. He barely sleeps. He wanders the filthy, overcrowded streets of St. Petersburg like a ghost, watching the city's misery, absorbing it, letting it fester inside him. And in that festering silence, a theory is born. Raskolnikov has constructed a philosophy, and it is terrifying in its cold, calculated logic. He believes that human beings are divided into 2 categories. The first category, the ordinary, the masses, the obedient, the fearful, the ones who exist simply to reproduce and maintain the world as it is. The second category, the extraordinary, the Napoleons, the Caesars, the rare, towering individuals who possess the right, no, the obligation, to step beyond conventional morality when history demands it. These extraordinary men, Raskolnikov believes, are not bound by the laws that govern ordinary people. If a great man must commit a crime in service of a higher purpose, then it is not truly a crime. It is history moving forward. And Raskolnikov believes, with every fiber of his starving, isolated, fever-bright mind, that he is one of these extraordinary men. To prove it, he has chosen a target: Alyona Ivanovna, an elderly pawnbroker, a woman Raskolnikov has visited before, pawning his father's watch, his sister's ring, small possessions exchanged for coins that barely cover a week's bread. He despises her. In his mind, she is a parasite, a cold, cruel leech who grows fat on the desperation of the poor, hoarding money she will never use, exploiting those with nowhere else to turn. In Raskolnikov's philosophy, her death would not be a loss. It would be an arithmetic equation, one worthless life subtracted from the world. And with her money, he could complete his studies, build his future, do great things. The equation, to him, is simple. It is rational. It is just. But ideas and actions are separated by something Raskolnikov has fatally underestimated: the weight of reality. On an oppressively hot July evening, Raskolnikov crosses that distance. He climbs the stairs to Alyona Ivanovna's apartment. He hides an axe beneath his coat. His hands are steady. His mind is cold. He knocks. She opens the door. And in a matter of seconds, with the handle of an axe, Rodion Raskolnikov becomes a murderer. But something goes catastrophically wrong. Alyona's half-sister, Lizaveta, gentle, simple, innocent Lizaveta, arrives unexpectedly. She sees everything, and Raskolnikov, driven by pure animal panic, kills her too. Lizaveta was not in the theory. Lizaveta was not the parasite. Lizaveta was exactly the kind of person Raskolnikov told himself he was acting for. The vulnerable, the exploited, the innocent. And with her death, the entire philosophical architecture Raskolnikov has built begins to crack. He flees the apartment, barely escaping. By the thinnest margin of luck, he returns to his coffin room, collapses, and the fever begins. Not just a physical fever, a fever of the soul. Because here is the truth that crime and punishment drives like a nail through the reader's chest. You can construct a perfect philosophical justification for an act. You can call it rational. You can call it necessary. You can call it extraordinary. But the human soul does not care about your philosophy. The human soul knows what you did, and it will not be silent. For days, Raskolnikov lies burning in his tiny room, drifting between consciousness and nightmare, terror and delusion. He is certain the police know. Every knock on the door, every glance from a stranger on the street, every casual word in conversation, all of it feels like an accusation. All of it feels like the walls closing in. And in this journey, we're doing something special. Using advanced AI techniques, we've transformed the illustrations and scenes from the book's pages into vivid, lifelike visuals. So you won't just hear this story, you'll witness it. The world Dostoevsky builds around Raskolnikov is not incidental. St. Petersburg itself is a character, suffocating, labyrinthine, morally diseased. The canals stink in the summer heat. Drunks collapse in the streets. Families are crushed into single rooms. Children go hungry. Women are sold. Men are ground down by poverty and shame until they become unrecognizable to themselves. Into this world steps Porfiry Petrovich, the investigating magistrate. And Dostoevsky has created in him one of the most remarkable figures in all of literary history. Porfiry does not hunt Raskolnikov with evidence. He hunts him with psychology. He smiles. He rambles. He seems distracted, even foolish. And then, with surgical precision, he inserts a single question, a single observation, that cuts straight to the wound. Porfiry knows. Not legally. Not yet. But he knows the shape of Raskolnikov's mind, because he has studied it carefully, and because he understands something fundamental that Raskolnikov does not yet understand about himself. That guilt is not a weakness of the philosophy. Guilt is the proof that the philosophy was always wrong. Meanwhile, the world around Raskolnikov keeps pulling him back into human connection, no matter how desperately he tries to remain alone, to remain cold, to remain the extraordinary man above ordinary feeling. There is his mother, Pulcheria, his sister, Dunya, beautiful, proud, sacrificing herself to a marriage she despises in order to send money home to her brother, the brilliant one, the one with the great future. There is his friend Razumikin, warm, loyal, stubbornly, almost comically decent. A man who represents everything Raskolnikov's philosophy dismisses: ordinary goodness, ordinary compassion. And then, most devastatingly, there is Sonia. Sofia Semyonovna Marmeladova. Sonia. Her father is Marmeladov, a broken, alcoholic civil servant whom Raskolnikov encounters in a tavern in the novel's opening pages. A man who is destroying himself and his family with drink, who confesses his degradation to Raskolnikov with the horrible lucidity of someone who sees exactly what he is doing and cannot stop. Marmeladov's daughter Sonia, barely 18 years old, has become a prostitute to keep her family from starving. Not from weakness, not from moral failure, from love, from the desperate, crushing love of a person who has nothing left to give except herself. Sonia is everything Raskolnikov's theory says should not matter. She is powerless. She is crushed by society. She has no extraordinary destiny, no theory, no grand philosophy. But Sonia has something Raskolnikov, for all his brilliance, does not. She has faith, not the comfortable, decorative faith of the privileged, not the institutional religion of the powerful. Sonia's faith is raw, irrational, and absolute. The faith of someone who has looked into the absolute darkness of human existence and chosen, against all evidence, against all logic, to believe that suffering has meaning, that redemption is real, that love is stronger than shame. When Raskolnikov first meets her, drawn to her by the gravitational pull of their shared suffering, he cannot understand her. He cannot accept her, but he cannot stay away. In one of the most extraordinary scenes in all of literature, Raskolnikov asks Sonia to read to him, from the Bible, the story of Lazarus, the man who was dead and was raised. And as Sonia's voice fills the room, trembling with the weight of those ancient words, something shifts in the novel's atmosphere. Something immense and quiet and devastating moves beneath the surface of the text. Because Dostoevsky is telling you, carefully, relentlessly, with everything he has, that the resurrection of Lazarus is not a historical miracle. It is the story. It is Raskolnikov's story. It is the story of every human soul that has buried itself in isolation, in pride, in the cold certainty of its own superiority, and must somehow find its way back to the living. But the journey back is not simple. It is not clean. There is Svidrigailov, a man who haunts the novel's second half like a shadow version of Raskolnikov himself. A man who has actually committed the moral freedoms that Raskolnikov only theorized. A man who has lived beyond conventional morality, and who carries in his eyes the absolute, bottomless emptiness that awaits on the other side. Svidrigailov is what Raskolnikov could become, and Dostoevsky does not flinch from showing us where that road ends. There is the escalating, brilliant psychological chess match between Raskolnikov and Porfiry, each conversation tightening the net, each meeting leaving Raskolnikov more fractured, more exposed, more desperate. And there is the moment, inevitable from the first page, when the weight becomes unbearable, when Raskolnikov finally walks into the police station, when he finally speaks the words aloud, when he finally, after all the philosophy and all the theory and all the desperate, burning pride, confesses. It is not a moment of weakness. It is, Dostoevsky argues with everything he has, a moment of profound, agonizing, necessary courage. The extraordinary man theory was always a lie, not because greatness is impossible, but because greatness built on the corpse of another human being is not greatness. It is only murder. Raskolnikov is sentenced to 8 years of hard labor in Siberia, the same Siberia Dostoevsky himself survived, and Sonia follows him there, not because she was asked, not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she chose to. Because in her understanding, that raw, irrational, absolute understanding, the road through suffering is the only road that leads anywhere worth going. The novel's final pages are among the most quietly shattering in all of literature. Raskolnikov, in the labor camp, watches Sonia, watches her move through that brutal world with the same steady grace she carried through St. Petersburg's gutters. And something, slowly, resistingly, painfully, begins to open inside him. Not a dramatic conversion, not a thunderclap of grace, just the beginning, just the first crack in the wall of pride, just the first, trembling possibility that he might, after all, be capable of something other than theory, that he might be capable of love, Dostoevsky ends the novel there, on the threshold, not with answers, with the possibility of a new story beginning. And that, perhaps, is the most honest thing about this extraordinary book. It does not offer redemption cheaply. It does not promise that guilt dissolves, that wounds heal cleanly, that the past can be undone. It only says, with the authority of a man who stood before a firing squad and came back, that the human soul, at its most broken, is still capable of turning toward the light. Crime and Punishment was published in 1866. Over 150 years have passed since those words first appeared on the page. And yet, open it tonight, in whatever city you live in whatever year you find yourself, and Raskolnikov's fever will feel like your fever. His pride will feel like your pride. His guilt will feel like something you have carried too, in the small hours, in the suffocating rooms of your own making. That is what it means to write a book that does not age. That is what it means to look into the human soul with absolute honesty and refuse to look away. Dostoevsky did not just write a novel. He mapped the territory where every human being who has ever chosen pride over love, isolation over connection, theory over truth, must eventually travel. And at the end of that territory, if you are fortunate, if you are brave enough, there is Sonia, waiting, reading, believing. See you between the pages.